Your freezer is not a food supply. It is a loan from the electrical grid, and the grid collects that loan, without warning and without apology, every time it fails. Picture the morning you open the freezer door, and the seal releases with no resistance, no cold exhale, no hum resuming behind the compressor noise that you stopped noticing years ago. The interior temperature has been climbing for 8 hours while you slept. The chicken is soft. Once the vegetables have released their cellular water and collapsed. The 12 pounds of ground beef you bought on sale last weekend has begun the irreversible process that ends in spoilage, and there is nothing to do but calculate the loss and start over. This is not a rare scenario. The United States experiences more power outages than any other developed nation. Over 3,000 significant outage events annually according to the Department of Energy. And the average outage duration has been increasing every decade as infrastructure ages faster than it is replaced. Your freezer works perfectly until the one moment it matters most, and then it is just an insulated box full of rotting protein. The Inca Empire, on which fed 12 million people across the most geographically extreme terrain on Earth for nearly 4 centuries, never had this problem. Not because they were lucky, because they understood something about food and water and cold that the modern preservation industry has spent a century trying to replicate with machines and has never quite matched. The cold chain is not food security. It is food dependency dressed in stainless steel and marketed as convenience. Every item in your refrigerator, your freezer, and the refrigerated section of your grocery store exists inside an unbroken temperature-controlled corridor that stretches from the processing facility through the distribution warehouse, through the retail cooler, and into your home appliance. And every single link in that corridor requires electricity. The moment electricity becomes intermittent, the corridor breaks. Food sitting at temperatures above 40 degrees Fahrenheit for more than 2 hours enters the bacterial growth zone, where pathogen populations can double every 20 minutes. 4 hours at room temperature and the food is a health risk. 8 hours and it is a loss. The USDA's own guidance is unambiguous. When in doubt, throw it out. That guidance costs the average American household between $1,500 and $1,800 in food waste annually, even during normal grid operation. Add one extended outage per year, and that number climbs past 2,000. You are not storing food. You are storing food temporarily, at ongoing electrical cost, with a spoilage guarantee built into every power interruption your utility company cannot prevent. High in the Andes, at altitudes above 12,000 feet where the air is thin and the night temperature drops below freezing even in summer, the Inca developed a food preservation technique called chuño, a process of transforming fresh potatoes into a shelf-stable product that required no refrigeration, no salt, no chemical preservative, and no equipment beyond the plateau itself. Archaeological evidence from Inca storage sites, called colcas, dates chuño production to at least 1400 AD, and likely centuries earlier among the pre-Inca cultures of the Tiwanaku civilization. Spanish chroniclers who accompanied the conquest of Peru in the 1530s documented colca warehouses containing chuño stores so vast they described them as sufficient to feed the entire Inca army for years without resupply. Modern archaeological analysis of colca sites across the Peruvian and Bolivian Altiplano has confirmed moisture content in recovered chuño samples below 2%. The same target specification as commercial freeze-dried food products that cost $12 to $15 per pouch at any outdoor retailer today. Water is not an ingredient in the food you are trying to preserve. It is the enemy of preservation. And understanding exactly why transforms your entire approach to long-term food storage. Microbial growth, bacteria, mold, yeast, requires water to metabolize, reproduce, and produce the enzymes that decompose organic material. Specifically, it requires what food scientists call water activity, the proportion of free, unbound water molecules available in a food product for microbial use. Fresh potato has a water activity of approximately 0.99, which means 99% of its water is free and available, near perfect conditions for every spoilage organism in existence. Reduce water activity below 0.60, and microbial growth stops entirely. Not slows, stops. Every bacterium, every mold spore, every yeast cell that lands on the surface of a properly dried food product finds nothing to work with and remains dormant indefinitely. The USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service has confirmed that food products at water activity below 0.60 have no defined upper shelf life limit under proper storage conditions, meaning the preservation is, in practical terms, permanent. The Inca were not applying food science terminology, but they were applying food science. They had identified the precise threshold below which their stored food would outlast any crisis, any drought, any military campaign, and they had built an entire empire's logistics around hitting that threshold consistently without a single piece of mechanical equipment. Think of a wet sponge. You can wring it out almost completely, reducing its weight by 80% and eliminating most of its usable moisture. But the moment you set it on a wet surface, it begins absorbing again. The cellular structure that gave it absorbency is still intact, still functional, still ready to take on water. Now imagine a sponge that has been heated and compressed until its cellular walls have ruptured and fused permanently into a rigid, sealed matrix. You can submerge it in water, and it will not absorb. The Inca Chuño process does exactly this to potato cells. It ruptures them mechanically, expels their moisture through a combination of freezing and compression, and then desiccates the resulting structure until there is nothing left for water to bond to. That is not drying. That is permanent cellular restructuring, and it is why Chuño does not rehydrate the same way a merely dried potato does. It has been architecturally transformed. The mechanism the Inca used required 3 environmental conditions working in precise sequence, and the Andean Plateau provided all 3 simultaneously with no human intervention. First, dual overnight temperature below freezing, typically between 18 and 25 degrees Fahrenheit at altiplano elevations, froze the potato's cellular water, expanding it and rupturing the cell walls from the inside. This is the critical first step. The freeze is not preservation, it is preparation. The rupturing of the cell walls releases the water from its bound cellular state and makes it mechanically accessible for removal. Second, the frozen potatoes were spread across the plateau surface at dawn and walked across repeatedly. Trampled underfoot by workers, crushed under flat stones, or rolled under wooden boards, which expelled the newly freed cellular water in the same way you squeeze water from a wet cloth. Third, the trampled potatoes were left exposed to the intense high-altitude sun and the relentless dry plateau wind for 3 to 5 days, during which the sublimation process, the direct conversion of ice to vapor without passing through liquid state, removed the remaining moisture to below the 2% threshold. Repeat the freeze-trample-dry cycle 3 to 4 times across 4 to 7 days, and the result was a product that archaeologists have radiocarbon dated at over 500 years old with intact cellular structure and edible composition. The materials you need to replicate this process in a modern temperate climate are simpler than the process suggests. You need potatoes, specifically starchy varieties with low sugar content such as russet or Yukon Gold, which contain the right ratio of starch to cellular water for clean rupture during freezing. You need a flat outdoor surface exposed to both direct sunlight and airflow, a clean concrete slab, a wire mesh rack elevated for undersurface air circulation, or a wooden platform covered in food-grade mesh. You need overnight temperatures below 28 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 6 consecutive hours, replicable in most northern climates between October and March, or using a chest freezer set to its lowest setting if outdoor conditions are insufficient. You need clean, dry storage containers, sealed glass jars, mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, or any airtight container that excludes both moisture and light. The total additional cost beyond the food itself is 0 if you already own a freezer and glass jars. Begin by selecting potatoes with no bruising, no green patches, and no sprouting. Damaged tissue introduces uneven moisture content that compromises the drying cycle. Wash thoroughly and dry the surface completely before processing. Do not peel. The skin provides structural integrity during the freeze-thaw cycles and is removed naturally in the later stages of the process. Blanch the whole potatoes in boiling water for exactly 8 minutes. No more, no less. Underblanching leaves active enzymes that cause browning and off flavors during drying. Overblanching begins cooking the outer layer, which seals the surface and impedes moisture expulsion. Remove from the boiling water and transfer immediately to an ice water bath for 5 minutes to halt the cooking process. Then spread in a single layer on your drying surface with at least 1 inch of separation between each potato. Place the spread potatoes outside, or in your chest freezer at its lowest setting, for a minimum of 8 hours at temperatures below 28 degrees Fahrenheit. When you retrieve them, they will be fully frozen and firm. Working while they are still cold, press each potato firmly with the flat of your palm or a clean board with even pressure, i.e., crushing it to roughly half its original thickness without shattering it completely. You are expelling the freed cellular water. You will see it release as you press. This is step 4. Spread the pressed potatoes back on your drying surface in direct sunlight with maximum airflow and leave them undisturbed for 8 hours. Step 5 is a second overnight freeze at the same temperature, followed by a second pressing the following morning with slightly greater pressure. The potato should now compress to approximately 1/3 of its original thickness. Step 6 is a final 3 to 5 day drying period in full sun and open airflow, turning the pieces every 12 hours until the product is hard, lightweight, and produces a hollow knock when tapped together. At this point, moisture content is at or below 2%. Package immediately in sealed containers with oxygen absorbers, store away from light and heat, and the product you have just made will still be edible in 25 years. Modern commercial freeze-drying equipment achieves moisture content between 1 and 4% using industrial vacuum chambers that cost between $30,000 and $300,000 per unit. The end product, sold in foil pouches with a 25-year shelf life guarantee, retails at between $12 and $20 per 100-gram serving, which works out to roughly $120 to $200 per kilogram of preserved food. A kilogram of fresh russet potatoes costs between 80 cents and $1.20 at any grocery store. The Inca Chuño method applied to that same kilogram of potatoes produces a preserved product with equivalent or superior shelf life, i.e., equivalent moisture content by independent laboratory analysis, and a processing cost of exactly zero beyond the electricity for the initial blanching step, which you could eliminate entirely by using solar heating at altitude, exactly as the Inca did. The Colca storehouse system the Inca built across the Andean highlands was not a contingency measure. It was the primary logistics infrastructure of an empire spanning 2,700 miles from modern-day Colombia to central Chile. Spanish conquistadors who entered Cusco in 1533 documented colca complexes containing enough preserved food to sustain the imperial capital for 10 years without any new harvest. Modern archaeological surveys of colca sites near Huánuco Pampa in Peru have identified over 2,000 individual storage structures at a single administrative center, each engineered with specific ventilation geometry to maintain the low humidity, low temperature conditions that kept Chuño stable indefinitely. The Inca did not store food for emergencies. They stored food because they understood that the distance between civilization and catastrophe is the length of time your food supply holds after the harvest fails. And they engineered that distance to be measured in decades, not weeks. Every item in your freezer right now exists inside a preservation window that closes the moment a transformer blows, a storm knocks out a substation, or a rolling blackout runs 3 days instead of 3 hours. And the average American household loses between $250 and $500 of food per extended outage every single time. Either your food supply survives without electricity or it doesn't. The Inca made that decision 4 centuries before the first electric refrigerator was manufactured, and they made it correctly. The method is documented, the science is confirmed, the shelf life is verified. Your move. Start with 10 pounds of potatoes this weekend and share this with someone whose freezer is their entire food plan.